Hey guys, welcome back. So today we're working on this 5-horse Little Wonder push blower. This was made in 1993, and given its age, it appears to be in very good shape. There is minimal rust, no missing parts, and no damage that I can see. That said though, someone did throw this away for some reason. My friend Jason pulled it out of the trash and dropped it off to us, and today we're going to get it running again. At least that's my hope. I have done 2 checks to it. The first was to take a look in the tank because these tanks you can't buy new. And used, they are quite expensive. Thankfully, though, the tank is not in very bad shape. Although the fuel that's in there smells pretty bad. So we do need to, at a minimum, clean the tank out. I'm sure we need to go through the carb. And what I'm most concerned about is actually the engine. I did pull the engine over and it rotates without issue, but I don't think I feel any compression. But I do hear the piston going up and down. So if we're lucky, we just need to adjust the valves. So the goal today is to get this up and running again. So let me get you set up a little bit better and get going on this. So first things first, let's check the oil. Make sure we didn't run out. Plenty of oil. Actually, it's filled right to the last thread and appears to be pretty clean. So yeah, that is a good sign. So let's get the plug out and just have a look inside the engine. Now it's a little bit hard on these engines as well, the flatheads. The plug is actually above the valve, so we may not be able to see the piston, which is fine. I just want to look at the valves, make sure that they're opening and closing. Potentially one of the valves is stuck. So it's pretty hard to get the angle here, but I think like this, you'll be able to see the intake valve. So I'm going to rotate the engine slowly. Yeah, and that valve is opening and closing. So it's not stuck. Let's check the exhaust, which you can just barely see on the left side here. So we'll do the same test. I'm just going to rotate the engine. Yep, and that valve is opening and closing. And then lastly, we can probably get just a little glimpse of the piston. Yeah, and I just saw it there. And again. So the valves, they are opening and closing, and the piston is doing what it should. Well, it's definitely good news that the valves aren't stuck and that the connecting rod seems to be connected, meaning the piston is going up and down. That said, though, I don't think we have compression. So before tearing anything down, let's get the compression tester in there and see where it's at. So this engine most likely has a decompression system. So 60 PSI is likely all we're going to see if everything is healthy. If there is no decompression system, then I would expect over 100. But in this case, I'd be surprised if we had anything. Oh no, the needle did move a little. We're at about 20. I think 20 is about all we're going to get. So yeah, we're at about 20 PSI, maybe 25 at best. And that's not enough. We should be closer to 60, I would think, on something like this. So yeah, not enough compression. to run this engine. So let's make sure. We'll give it just a little taste of fuel, and we'll pull it over. See if we get any signs of life. All right, I've got the throttle turned up, and actually the choke is on. Let's try it with the choke off. Yeah, and it's not even really trying. So I'm thinking, as a last ditch effort here, let's just pull the airbox cover off. We'll get some fuel and maybe some starting fluid right down the throat. We'll try this one last time. That does not look good. I'm surprised actually the carb isn't rusted up. You know, the choke plate does move. So yeah, let's try adding some fuel right in the throat, and we'll give this one last try. Well, that was kind of surprising. I did not expect the engine to start. You know, it didn't run well, but it ran good enough to at least know that the bottom end sounds good. Anyway, when it first started, I did notice a bunch of compression kind of blowing out the intake. So, likely it is the intake valve that is leaking and causing the issues we're seeing now. And surprisingly, the engine tried to get up to speed, but it just couldn't do it. And actually, it started to lose speed even though we were still trying to fuel it up. So I think, we just don't have enough compression to get this engine to run. Also, I noticed this little piece right here fly out from behind the blower housing when this was running. And there's actually another one down there. So, I think these look like rivets, and the starter recoil has a couple rivets that look suspiciously new. So I think someone may have used some rivets that were just a little bit too long and they got chopped off. Anyway, I do want to do a leak down test to figure out where the compression's going. And to do that, I'm actually going to pull the blower housing anyway to take a look at, any damage that may have been done, but that'll also let me position the engine at top dead center for the leak down test. Actually, the flywheel looks fine. I don't see any evidence that the rivets hit it. And actually on the back side here too, the rivets look to be in good shape. It doesn't look like any of them made contact with the flywheel. But what I do see are more pieces right here of old rivets. So I'm thinking what likely happened was that someone just drilled these old rivets out and they didn't clean up their mess. So I guess the good news is we don't have an issue with the recoil or the flywheel. But I am noticing we do have another problem. Actually, the kill wire looks like it's been chewed. There is bare copper back here, so that is something we're going to have to deal with. But first, let's fix the engine. So we'll get this at top dead center. We'll add a bit of pressure to the cylinder and just find out where it's leaking from. So to do this test, you have to be at top dead center, which is where I position the flywheel. And like that, both valves should be closed. The one thing you want to note, though, is that when you pressurize the cylinder, the engine can rotate if you're not exactly at top dead center, so you might have to reset. Anyway, the main benefit here, besides putting a percentage leak down to this engine, is that, we can pressurize the cylinder and find exactly where it's leaking out. Now, all engines leak. It's just a matter of, is it leaking too fast? And where is it leaking out of? Usually the valves don't leak that much. Past the rings, it's normal to get some past the rings, at least on these engines. So I'm going to add a bit of pressure going in to the cylinder. So we're at 50 psi in, 100% leak down. And I'm going to bring this up all the way to 100. Or as close as I can get it. It looks like 95. And we're at 90% leak down. So yeah, pretty high leak down. Little to no leakage from the exhaust. Definitely a fair amount getting past the rings, so we might have issues there. And the intake's a little bit harder to tell, but we are leaking pretty significantly past the intake. So yeah, we might have multiple issues here, but it's kind of hard to tell until we get one of them fixed. So, the intake is probably the easiest one to tackle first. So let's get that sealing, and then we'll double check where the leak down's at. So to check the valve clearance on a flathead engine like this, it's not that difficult. You just need to remove the valve cover. Unfortunately, it's behind the fuel tank. So to gain access to that, we do need to pull the tank, the carburetor, the air box, and most likely the exhaust, and some governor linkage. So once all this is out of the way, we can get the valve cover opened up and see what the clearance is at. So we'll disconnect the cable for the throttle. And then I think the carburetor and the tank should come off as one. We have a bolt down here. We have two holding the carb on. And a bit of linkage, which I think can all come off at the same time. Okay, let's get that bolt out while we're here. And it looks like we also have a wire here for the kill switch, so we'll get that out as well. That is likely the one that runs over to the ignition coil, the one that's chewed. And I'm going to leave that loose in there for now. Okay, that wire is disconnected. And it looks like for the carb, we can either use a wrench or a Torx bit. But the exhaust is kind of in the way, at least on the left side. On the right side, the tank's in the way, so we're going to have to get it, hopefully, from the side. I think I'm going to pull the exhaust. just going to go back and forth a little. This bolt does not feel good. I think I might have just broke it. Oh. Okay, not what I wanted to see. So we have one broken bolt. Let's get the good stuff on there. Wow. I think that one just snapped. So we are 0 for 2. I'm not sure I've had that happen before. So that's going to be a problem. We do have threads in here, so worst case we could put a barrel muffler on. But I'd like to try to save the threads if I can. Anyway, let's not worry about that for now. Let's finish getting the tank off, and we'll circle back. All the bolts on this machine come right out, except for those two. All right, so for the clearance, I actually don't know what it's supposed to be on this engine because I haven't found an engine number yet. Usually it's on the blower housing. I'm thinking someone must have replaced it at some point. So, most likely it's 8,000s for the intake and 12 for the exhaust. But we'll start with 2,000 since we know the intake is leaking. And no, I cannot fit 2,000s in there. Let's try the exhaust. And it won't fit there either. So, although it's only the intake leaking right now, I'd say the exhaust is not far behind. So both valves are way out of adjustment. Yeah, I was a little bit concerned here that there was no model on the blower housing. Usually it's stamped on the top or on one of the sides, and that was not the case on this machine, but we do actually have that information right here. It's stamped on one of the tins that wrap around the side of the engine. So it's a little bit hard to see, but it is there. So that is a good thing because we are going to need to order some parts, and I want to make sure I get the right parts. Anyway, before we get the engine opened up to make that valve adjustment, I do want to spend a minute and just see if I can get these broken bolts out. Chances are I'm going to make a mess, and I'd rather do it before opening the engine up. Ah. Yeah, they're just not sticking to that stud, at least what's left of it. So I think I'm going to have to resort to plan B here and just drill and retap that. So I'm going to try an easy out. And I'm honestly not expecting it to work because an easy out actually might make things worse if I break it. But we'll try not to break it. So I'm going to try to get a punch mark right in the middle. No, there's no chance. I think that metal is just galled right to the aluminum. So, yeah, with that in mind, I think we do need to drill and retap or just get a completely different exhaust system. And I actually don't want to drill it right now because I don't have what thread this is. You know, I assume it's probably the same as the intake, but yeah, it may not be. So instead, let's get back on course here. We'll get the head removed, we'll get the valves out, and make the adjustment. So let's see if we can do this without breaking any bolts. Yeah, these are coming out maybe a little bit too easy. Like someone's had this off before and didn't torque it properly because these are barely tight. I think this is the only one that doesn't feel great, but it is coming out. So we're at top dead center, and both valves should be closed. And the intake, although it looks closed, it's not. Otherwise, I wouldn't be able to spin it like this. And the exhaust, that one is shut tight. Let's take a look at the bore. Cylinder looks pretty good. So yeah, I think if we just fix the valve problem, we should be back in business. Yeah, for now, I'm just going to get the intake valve out. I want to make that adjustment and then put it back in and just recheck the leak down. I want to make sure we're in the green. And if we are, then I'll make the adjustment, well, on the exhaust, but also clean up everything. There we go. So I'm going to use the belt sander to take a little bit of length off of this valve. According to the specs, this should be 6/1000ths of an inch gap between the valve stem and the lifter. So I'm not going to take much off, and it actually comes off very quickly. So we'll just touch this to the sander maybe twice, drop this back in the machine, and see where it's at. All right, let's see where we're at. And a 6/1000ths fits in there actually without any drag. So I may have overshot this a bit. Let's try an 8/1000ths. Yeah, and an 8 has just a bit of drag, but not a lot. So we did overshoot. 7/1000ths is the upper end of the spec. Let's try a 10/1000ths. Yeah, and a 10 actually feels pretty good. So yeah, we overshot a bit. That said, though, this should hopefully fix our issues. So I'm not going to do the exhaust valve yet. I'm not going to clean anything up. I actually want to get the spring back on, get the head bolted back on, and we'll do another leak down test. Just make sure that this adjustment is going to put us in the green. All right, let's check the leak down now that the intake has been adjusted. And not looking any better. We're at 50 psi in, 100% leak down. Let's bump it up to 100 psi. And leak down's pretty much the same at 90%. So yeah, that is not good. Although the intake isn't the source of the leak anymore, so I guess we did fix that, although there is a little bit coming out of there. And now actually the majority is coming out of the exhaust. So yeah, that just highlights that, well, we have to adjust the exhaust valve too, and we should probably clean the valves and lap them in before we do this test again. So for the exhaust valve, I'm only going to do one pass and then check it. We're aiming for 10 thousandths. All right, and I just checked it. We're at 6 thousandths, so we have a few more to go. So the exhaust valve should be 10 thousandths, plus or minus a thousandth. So I'm going to start on the high side, which is an 11. And that one fits. It does have a bit of drag. Let's check a 12. Yeah, and that one has actually a lot of drag. So we're, I'd say, at an 11, which should be fine. So I'm going to lap the valves in, both of them. We'll get the springs back on and see if things have improved any. So I've got the valves cleaned up. They've been lapped in and reinstalled. So let's see if we can beat 90% leak down. So we're coming out of the red. And when this gets to 100, that's when we take our reading on the right. So at 100 PSI, we are just barely in the green at about 37% leak down. So that should run quite a bit better. You know, I would like it lower, but, you know, for what it is, I think it's going to be fine. You know, the valves are actually sealing, so all that leak down, it's going past the rings. So, you know, the rings could be worn out. They could be a little bit stuck. But then again, most of these engines I test, you know, the leak down is kind of high, like around the 30% range. So I don't think we're that far off. So I'm thinking, let's do a compression test now that the valves have been fixed. Let's see if that number is any better than the 25 PSI we got before. All right, let's make this a fair test. I'm going to pull the engine over or rotate it slowly so we don't bypass the compression release. You can see we're already at like 40 PSI, spinning at this slow speed. Let's go a little faster. And yeah, it looks like we stopped at 60 PSI with the compression release mechanism kicking in. So that's actually pretty much perfect. And I know we don't have an exhaust, we don't have a carburetor, but let's try to get it started anyway. So I know it doesn't look like much, but we now have a runner. You know, all you need is fuel, spark, timing, and compression, and the engine will run. And this engine, it's actually running and sounding quite well. Now, obviously, we still have a ways to go. You know, I do need to take this head back off. I want to decarbon it. We need to get a new head gasket as well. And the fuel system, I'm sure, needs to be gone through. So I'm going to place an order, get some of the parts I need, and while we wait for that stuff to arrive, we'll prep everything to the extent possible. So before I clean things up, I do want to place an order for parts, but I can't do that until I know if I can use the exhaust I have or if I need to order a new one up that uses these internal threads. So let's spend a minute. We'll finish drilling these out. We'll try to retap them, and hopefully we can get some threads back. Got to be careful. I want to get this as straight as I can. And I'm a little bit off, so I'm kind of aiming down just a bit. And then we'll center that up when the time's right. Yeah, it's looking pretty good. Not perfect. And apparently this is a very common problem too with these 5-horse Briggs, that these bolts just gall and you can't get them out. What's really surprising though is just how easily the bolt broke. There was no strength to that metal whatsoever. So we are through with the 1/8 inch bit. And we need to finish this now with a 13/16, and then we'll run a tap through it. Okay, good. We've got the threads back, at least on one of them. So let's try the bottom one now. Beautiful. 2 for 2. As far as the exhaust goes, I'm thinking I might swap out this one right here, because to get 2 new shoulder bolts, once you factor in the price of parts and tax and shipping, it's going to be about $25 to use this one. And I have another. This one came from that Pathfinder go-kart I worked on last year. That 5-horse Briggs ended up being a total loss, but the exhaust is still good. And this one we don't need any special bolts for. This exhaust looks like it's going to bolt on just fine. And it even comes with a protective cage. And we have the bolt hole right there to hold it in place. So I think we're going to go with this when we put it back together. Don't want to make it too clean. It's just going to get dirty when I go use it. But we'll make it look a little better, because this machine, besides the grime on it, it's in really good physical condition. It's actually surprising that the engine needs any work at all, because leaf blowers, they don't get a lot of use, usually. A couple hours a year is it. And this machine, I was wrong. I thought it was 1993, but according to the engine, it's actually 1999. So this isn't quite as old as I thought it was. So we'll get these valves back out. And the head isn't too dirty, but we do need to clean up these surfaces, especially the ones that seal. So let's get the valves in, hopefully for the last time. And the exhaust valves is a little bit more tricky. It has this cap right here, which goes on the top, which is kind of interesting because usually if there is a seal on the valve stem, just one, it's on the intake. In this case, don't think it's a seal. You know, this is all metal. So I'm not really sure what the purpose of it is other than to make it a little bit more tricky. So I have to hold that in place, get the spring in, like that, and release the tension. Okay, good. So I think at this point we can just put the valve cover on and probably move on to the fuel system. So I'm thinking before we go much further here, let's clean up that air box. I'm going to soak it in Evaporust, but before I do that, you know, let's get what we can off using the wire wheel. So the tank I am a little nervous about. You know, one, these bolts, so they rusted in. This one came out pretty easily, so hopefully the other four are the same. And although the tank looks good, there is a bowl on the top here that tends to rust out. So hopefully that is still there. And there's one more bolt which holds this choke mechanism in place. So we'll get that out and get that out of the way. And three more bolts, one right there, another there, and the third one's right there. That one's a little stuck. Let's try this one. Yeah, so those three are in there pretty good. We'll try the impact on low and see where that gets us. Yeah, a little bit of rust. Not a good sign. Definitely some surface rust, but I don't see a hole. So this should be usable. So let's get maybe the contents of the tank out. And I'm going to let this dry for a few days because I do want to get a little wire wheel in there and just break off that loose rust. It didn't take much. The tank cleaned up really well. There's no more debris down there. So I think that debris, you know, those rust chunks likely just came from the bowl. So, you know, technically we could use some evaporust to clean the bowl out. The problem is, you know, although evaporust doesn't harm metal, if there's no good metal in here and it's only rust, then the evaporust is going to just eat a hole right through it. So yeah, we'll give it a few days. We'll let it fully air out, and then we'll just use the little wire wheel to clean this up the best we can. Okay, so let's see what surprises this has to offer. So we'll start just by getting this linkage kind of out of the way, as well as this gasket. We'll need a new one of those. Now, the way this carb works is it actually has a fuel pump. It pumps fuel up through this long tube, and it exits right down there and actually fills up that rusted bowl. And it's this tube right here that actually picks up the fuel through this screen into the main jet. And you can see there's a bunch of rust here, but that rust is from the bowl. It's not actually the carb, so that should clean off. Main jet looks to be plugged, so we'll make sure that's clear. We'll also double check the tube and make sure that that is clear. Looks like we have an adjustable needle right there. Let's see where it's set at. And it's not turning, so I'm not going to force it. We might pre-soak this in the ultrasonic. But let's get the pump opened up. We'll get that cleaned out the best we can. And yeah, I think this needs a soak for about 10 minutes before we try that needle again. It looks pretty clean, actually. Diaphragm, a little bit crusty, but not terrible. It might have worked, although not very well. It is a little crisp. So I'm going to rinse this real quick, just with a bit of carb spray. We'll check the flow, make sure this tube isn't blocked. And I guess we'll clear that as well and just run a bit of carb cleaner through there. And then we'll give this a quick soak in the ultrasonic. Just blow a little bit of carb spray in there. It should come out down at the bottom of the tube, which it is, so that is not blocked. Actually, this is backing out, so it might not be a needle. It may have just been a jet. Either that or someone bottomed out the needle. Yeah, it's actually a jet. Okay, good. So all the passages are clear. Technically, this would probably run with a new diaphragm as is, but since we have it apart, let's just soak it and get this as clean as we can. Carb's all done, cleaned up really well. So I think this is going to run the engine. That is, once the engine's back together. But I do have, I think, everything I need to get the carb back together. I do have some leftover gaskets from the Dingo project, which also had a 5-horse engine. So we'll get this pilot jet snugged down. And then we'll get the pump back together. I'm going to be using this right here. This is an Oregon part. And this diaphragm is in much better condition than the one that came out of there. So this goes on like that. This has to go over the locating pin. Like that. But even before we do that, we've got to put the spring right there. And the cap on top of the spring. Like that. That's pretty much it. It's not a lot to this carb. Now, we do have the screen, but I'm going to hold off on that. I just have it soaking in evaporust to try to get some of that rust out of the screen, so we'll give that a few days. And I also do have a replacement gasket. This is the one that goes between the carb and the tank. So these, I think we can use either one. They appear to be the same, although this one looks to be a closer match. So we'll go with that when the time is right, but we're going to hold off because we do need to clean the bowl on the tank before getting this reinstalled. Well, it's been a couple days and the evaporust, it's worked its magic. I think it's done pretty much all it can do. So I'm going to get this cleaned up, dried off, and I actually want to put a coat of paint on it because the rust, it will likely reform, and being that this is part of the air box, the air filter isn't going to protect the engine. If rust reforms and flakes off, it's going to run right through the engine, causing damage. So we need to deal with the tank now, and it still smells like fumes. So I am running some air through it just to kind of dilute the concentration so it'll be less likely to ignite. And instead of using kind of the standard wire wheel, I am using brass instead, which shouldn't spark, and that's going to reduce the chance of ignition. So now that the tank is all clean, we can get the carb bolted back on. The screen cleaned up pretty well, though there is still a stain. But it does function just fine, and it's a good thing too, because the bowl, although it's pretty clean now, you know, it's going to form rust again, so that screen is going to be pretty important. So get the gasket roughly in place. And bolt it down. I'm going to keep those screws kind of loose until we get everything situated. And I'm also going to add this heat shield on. This was with the exhaust system on the other machine. So I'm not sure if it's required, but it certainly isn't going to hurt. So we also need to secure this pipe at the same time. So this is just a bit of degreaser. We'll do that on the head as well before getting the head gasket installed. Well, before we go too much further, I do need to repair this kill wire for the ignition coil. And originally, I was just going to make up a new one, but then I realized the spade connectors I have, they're actually too wide, and they don't hold on properly to that ignition coil. So instead, you know, we can repair this. Most of it is good. It's really just this section right here that has the insulation exposed. So I think the easiest thing to do is probably just use a little bit of shrink tubing. And we'll just slide that over the damaged area. And shrink it down. And let's get the kill wire plugged in. And we're going to route it behind the coil and above the valve cover and then down under the tank. And we'll just connect the wire that runs to the coil to this switch right here. And the way that it works is when you move the throttle to the off position, it grounds out the switch, passes the ground through the wire, and kills spark at the coil. And the last thing down here is the throttle cable. So we'll get that reconnected like that. And the throttle lever, it is in the stop position right now. So we want to make sure that this is all the way to the left. And then we'll clamp down. All right, perfect. We have full range of motion. So right there is full throttle, and the other direction, that should kill spark. Getting pretty close, but I just realized I did something kind of in the wrong order. This tin here, which guides the cooling air around the head, it's actually held on by these front 3 head bolts. So I need to get those out, get this tin in place, and then torque it down again. So we are all back together, and theoretically this should run. I guess the question is how well. So we're about to find out. We are fueled up and ready to go. Now the bowl, it is empty. So we're going to have to pull this a good few times to get the pump to pump the fuel up into the bowl. But once it does, this should run. All right, let's give this a try. Ignition's on. Choke's on. Huh. All right, we lost it when the choke went off. Let's try it again. Okay, good. It took about 5 pulls. It started right up, but then it stalled out once I turned the choke off. Thankfully, it restarted without too much effort, and then I was able to turn the choke off about 5 or 10 seconds later. The engine's running very well. The carb is doing well also. We can run at full throttle, and we can idle it down nice and slow. So things are looking pretty good. But there is one outstanding item, and that is the oil. I have not changed it, so now that we have some heat in the engine, let's get that oil changed. And I don't see this one going too well. The drain is right there, and you're supposed to get the oil through this hole. But the way I see it, once I pull that plug, it's just going to shoot kind of everywhere except where it's supposed to go. So I'm going to try to use the Forma funnel to direct it where it needs to go. So the oil that came out looks pretty good. I don't see any signs of a problem. So theoretically, this thing should be 100%. So I want to bring it outside and try it out. I guess the only problem is it's the wrong time of year. I'm not sure we're going to find many leaves, but yeah, let's see what we can scrounge up. Yeah, definitely the wrong time of year for a leaf blower. There are really no leaves to speak of to try this thing out. That said, though, I was prepping for a test for a couple generators, and this whole area is a complete mess. I have this walnut tree right here, which is dropping these catkins everywhere. I wouldn't say it's a great test, but it is better than nothing. So let's get that push blower fired up and clean up the space. So I can see where it gets its name. It is a little wonder. I mean, it is only a 5-horse leaf blower, but this thing has no issues at all. It was one pass that got most of the stuff off the test area, and I just ran it up and down the length of the driveway just to give it a little bit more runtime. And as far as I can tell, this thing is absolutely perfect and should be ready to go come this fall. So I hope this video helps someone. Thanks for watching.